Okay, so the very next step is going to be how do we go about creating the actual hand section. So what I've got the high poly version of my arm over here, and I'm just going to use this as a guide just so we can see potentially the type of arm we could make. So we have here a sequence of cylinders, very straightforward to accomplish, followed by a cube, and then arguably some derivatives of a cube that actually act as almost the pincers, and then we've got some additional cylinders in there. So that should all be very straightforward to create a high and a low from. So we do have this additional cylinder over here, which is arguably holding the arm and the hand together. So we'll start with that. We'll keep it nice and basic. So essentially, how do we go about making a high and low poly? Very straightforward. I'm not going to bother positioning it in the right place, etc. At this stage, it's a bit pointless. We'll do that, or you guys will do that anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to settle with for the defaults, and yeah, that will do. I'll just adjust the height segments. We'll keep it nice and basic. So 20 segments for the purpose of this demo. Convert to editable poly. As you can see, we don't have any interior loops at the moment. I'm just going to select the top and the bottom. So in terms of selection, click on one, and obviously Control will act as an addition and Alt will act as a reduction of the selection. So with those two selected, click on Insert, and again using Alt to control it. I'm going to pop it to something along those lines, and I'm going to click on Tick. So what we're doing is we're starting the process in terms of adding in the geometry, the topology, so our high to low can work, and certainly our high has the correct topology. So as it stands at the moment, we've actually done this on the default layer, which is going to result in us having to go back at some point and cleaning this up on the low poly. So one way of avoiding that is just undo that. Is just make sure that we add an additional low poly on there, and we just call it high poly underscore base. And that way we just switch off the modifiers on the top of it, including this one, and we should have our low poly. So on this particular modifier, now that I've renamed it, this edit poly modifier, now we'll add the actual insets. I'll click on insert, scale that using Alt to keep things small. I agree with that as the basics. That's sufficient enough for the time being, and we'll add some additional edge loops. So we could chamfer these edges, so could double click on either of those and just chamfer them, similar to what we've done previously. Or we could in essence use the Swift loop. In this instance, I think we'll just give the Swift loop a go. The chamfer would work best because ideally you want that chamfer to be the same as that, and the Swift loop doesn't give you the same level of precision. But regardless, you're barely going to notice it, I suppose. So we've called this high poly base. We could add an additional layer on there and call it support loops again. Why not? Let's keep the scene nice and clean. So another edit poly on top of that. Rename that HP underscore loops. I'm going to go back into edge mode. I'm going to click on edit and a Swift loop. I'm just going to drop a Swift loop here, one there. So essentially one either side of the area where you want the curvature to be. So one there and one there. This will work very well purely because of the fact that we have lots of quads. We do need some additional supporting geometry. If we were to just turbo smooth that now, you can see there's almost like a bit of a blend going on over here. We can decrease that by upping the iterations, or we could in essence just delete that and add some additional support loops just to make life a bit easier. So in this instance, it's probably wiser just to click on one edge loop, press shift on any adjacent edge loop, and it will select the entire ring. Or you can just select one and click on ring over here. So we'll click on the connect option and we'll say we want two connections, and if we scroll up and down here, it will allow us to just separate those apart. And why not? Let's live wild. We'll just drop some additional ones in there. Click on that. There we are. We've now got sufficient level of detail, and Turbo Smooth is going to give us our high. And ultimately our low is always going to be, quite simply because we've been clever in how we've set this up, we just switch off our particular modifiers. At this point over here, we probably should optimize it. It's got a giant N-gon at the moment. That's not something that in the long run would be ideal, so we can go around and fix that. So for the time being, this will be our high poly. We'll call this HP underscore underscore base. Control V, and let's rephrase that and call this LP, obviously, for the low poly. So we should have two copies there. There's our high poly, there's our low poly. So with our low poly arm base selected, I'm just going to remove the smooth, remove the high poly loops and the high poly base, and then collapse two on there. So we do have a big N-gon here at the moment, and if we were to convert that into quads and tris, which is ideally what you want to do, if we just deselect all the polys, and then a modifier to do that is the turn to poly modifier, and you want to limit the polygon size to 4, and you can see what it will do. So you can see now, see the edge loops, not ideal in the sense that it's hardly very clean. It's not going to make a great difference in reality because it is entirely flat. But if we were to just adopt a slightly different process and to keep it clean, what we could do is just select the top and the bottom, delete them completely, go into edge mode. I'm just going to go to top view. I'm just going to select the entire top ring, so I can double click on that top ring. But this time around, just go back into top view again, get that on there. I'm going to deselect these two on this particular edge, and then bridge. And that way, we'll end up with a much cleaner result. You can now see the edge flow, the topology is a lot cleaner. So let's just select these two boundaries using the border and just press cap, and that will fill that gap. A quick way of not having to do all of this again is what we could do is we could just select the top row, and then what we do is turn on our snap, make sure it's going to snap into vertices and enable axis constraints is turned on, and then just press shift and snap it to the bottom like so. And click on clone to element. What will happen now is the normal is facing outwards, and naturally it's still facing outwards, so this would be inverted. So we would need to press flip at this point. And then quite simply at these points over here, we will have two vertices, select everything and just click on weld. So what we're doing is a key principle of where you have geometry which is fine and it works and it's clean, you can duplicate that rather than having to do it all over again and delete areas and fix areas. So that looks perfectly fine now. So there's our low poly arm base. Obviously the baking process is entirely the same as what we've done previously. We would need to unwrap this. Clearly it's a cylinder, so it should be very straightforward to unwrap, and we know an unwrap on a cylinder is always going to be two circular UV shells followed by a rectangular one, and that's quite easy to do. So just to demonstrate how easy it is, and naturally this principle would be applied to the other areas on that high poly, the other bolts, circular bolts that were holding that arm in place. So if we were to just quickly unwrap this, and click on the unwrap editor, it's going to give it one big UV, turn off, ignore back facing. So just select all of it, make sure you're in poly mode, not vert, select all of it, planar map based on a view line, and then quite simply just use something along the lines of the angle, select by planar angle, put this on 2 degrees perhaps, select the top, select the bottom, make sure nothing else is selected, click on break, move these over to the side, and then we can see now, as we said before, two circles and a rectangle. Put a break in there, select everything, peel a couple of times, rescale, pack. And you probably want to put that there, then you can scale this up a touch more, but it's not going to make a great difference because naturally when we do unwrap everything put together, we will have multiple components. So we could just move that to there and then just hit pack again. That would do for the time being. We'd always make sure that select inverted and select overlap flags nothing. Make sure you're in poly mode, so that will be adequate enough. I'm not going to bake that across now because you should understand that process by now. We'll probably do it again at some point, but for the time being that will do. So yes, that would be how to do the actual arm section. I think what I've done is, like an idiot, I've not copied the damn thing successfully. So what I've done is I've ended up flattening the high poly variant. Not a problem, because you will have saved it at some point, or we could just go back and knock up a quick cylinder, as the case may be. Even then, even if I only had this to start with, it's quite easy to turn this back into high poly. Just delete this, cap it, chamfer these edges, voila, job done. So let's think about these other areas over here. Clearly that's a cube, so let's attempt this cube section. So it's a cube, but it comes in over here. So it's essentially, imagine it as being a chamfered cube, and then over here it's almost quite literally just scaled in, I think. So let's give that a go. Let's start with a box. Again, I'm not going to bother getting the dimensions absolutely perfect. That's entirely up to you. What I'm going to do is just going to collapse that. What I'll do is I will delete these two edges over here, or those two poly, should I say. I'm just going to select all the vertical edges. So pressing Shift, for example, select one, press Shift for the adjacent, and that will select all of them. So we'll put a chamfer on there. I'm just going to agree with the defaults, that's fine. What I will do now is select the entire top border in border mode and just click on cap. And then what I can do is I can extrude that. Once we're in poly mode anyway. So extrude that and then just scale that in, like so. So this is where it does become quite interesting, because Swift Loop won't necessarily work over here. There's another alternative method which I'm going to cover in a few seconds, but this technique is quite useful for when essentially you've got n-gons in there and you don't want to have your Swift Loops flow everywhere, here, there and everywhere. So for the time being, that's adequate enough. All I will do is I will inset this one more time. Let's scale that up a bit to something along those lines and click on the plus. And this time around, what it will allow me is, when I use Swift Loop, I can maintain excellent topology along here, along all the edges where I need it to be nicely quadded. If I didn't add that insert into there and tried using Swift Loop, it would cause no end of issues. So this would be the technique to utilize for that. So as I said previously, why bother trying to replicate the entire process again when ultimately you've already done the top half and there's no need necessarily to do the bottom half again. So what we did previously was essentially we could press E for angle, turn on your angle snap, sorry, press E to go into rotate, and then we could say just rotate this, that's in increments of 5, but you could put on there 90 degrees I suppose. Press Shift and then just rotate it 180 degrees and then again snap it into place. A tad cumbersome in this instance because we would have to move the pivot point. It might be easier, in fact it will be easier, if we just act a bit clever with this and just use the symmetry modifier. So within here we have symmetry, and this will produce symmetry modifier. I'll click on the mirror option over here, press F3. You can see that there is going to act as a symmetry modifier. So if I scale that up so just to make a bit more sense, I'll press R again. And now if I was to rotate this now, making sure that I've selected the mirror, you can see there I rotate it because I've still got my angle snaps on. If I just turn those off, I'll undo a few steps, turn that off, and now if I press Shift you can see what's happening. It's going to, using the pivot point as a basis, it's going to allow me to mirror it directly across. So that'd be a very, very quick way of duplicating the top half to the bottom half here. I just undo that and turn on my angle snap. At least it's going to do it in 90 degrees and it will be perfect here. So that's adequate enough. On the symmetry modifier, right click, collapse to. Clearly it's too large. Not an issue. Select that interior edge loop with a double click. Control backspace, delete the edges and the verts. Just select the bottom vert and just scale it up to however you feel the shape needs to be. So this would act as our low poly. We still need to resolve the n-gon issue over here. We can do that right at the end. For the time being, I'll assume this is okay. I'm just going to affect my pivot point, center it again. Again, just trying to keep things nice and clean. And now let's add some Swift loops to generate our high poly. So let's just call this h poly underscore arguably hand palm or something like that. Oh, we'll just call it hand. So that's going to be the basis for it. Let's add on some additional modifiers. So edit poly on top of that. Rename that. Call it HP underscore support underscore loops. And then just add the loops in via the Swift loop again. So edit Swift loop. That's going to pop on there. Remember in the rule of threes, 1, there's the second one, and there's the third one. You all need to press it twice to get the 3 that you need. 1, the second one already exists, and 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Just work our way along. If we were to be very clever about this, naturally we'd only need to do 1/4, and then we could always just use the symmetry modifier again to duplicate all of that. But it's only a few seconds of worth of work ultimately. And then we will need to just do the same here. 1, 2, 3, and 1 there, and 1 there. We do need some additional loops in there to act as support. So if I just press shift at this point, it will snap to, because I'm in the Swift loop mode, and if I press shift, it will snap to the center. If I press shift again, it will average it out in some cases. It hasn't in this case, but it can cause problems, so don't press shift. Press shift to snap in the center, let go of shift, and then just add in the edge loop over there. You can see here it's going to snap by pressing shift, let go of the shift, and that's going to be the center line. As we stated previously, the alternative methodology is just going to be right click, get out of the Swift loop, select the edges in question. So again, pressing Control and then Shift to select both of these, and then just click on Connect, and then you can just add 2 additional ones in here. Click on the plus icon, select these ones, and add some additional ones there as well. Click on the plus, do the same for the vertical, click on the plus again, and the vertical over here. And that should be nice and detailed for our needs. Probably should add one on the edge over here as well, so why not? I'm just going to select those now. So Control for the first selection, Shift to select all the ring, Control, Shift, and then just in the connect, we don't need to go wild with 9, we'll just pop 2 in there. And let's just turbo smooth that. And if we look at that carefully, we've now got a nice sufficient amount of detail. We have missed a section over here. You can see we've missed, and it's using the Swift loop, we've missed these 2 sections. So I'm just going to click on HP loop again, click on the edge, add in 2 additional loops, or 4 ultimately I suppose. And then we can just jump back to our turbo smooth, and now we have our high poly variant. So let's create our low poly now. So I'm going to duplicate that, and remember last time how we lost our high poly, and it was because it was on instance, and I should have checked for that. So in this case we'll change it this time and call it LP, and making sure that it's on copy. So L low poly hand, click on OK. Because we were clever again, just delete or undo those particular loops. We have got the one underneath, so it's going to slightly confuse matters. So if I just click on the isolate selection, it's just going to get rid of everything and just show the low poly. So now we know there's our support loops and there's our turbo smooth. So let's just turn those 2 off, collapse everything, and now what we can do is we can optimize this, because at the moment it's hardly optimal. Clearly it's not low poly, it's flat there, so there's no reason for these edges. We purely made those for the purpose of the turbo smooth. So if I just turn on my angle snap again, so not angle snap, angle selection, lock that down to 2 degrees, select the top, select the bottom, and press delete. And now go into border mode, select the entire border, but this time just deselect these 2 particular polys over here. In fact, it might be easier if we just select everything again, and then deselect these 2 here. Because what we're going to do is we're going to bridge, so we should be able to bridge directly across from here to here, here to here. Click on bridge once, and there we are. To close that off, and it's kept things nice and clean for us. Same principle applies over here. Select everything, deselect these two edges and bridge, and now that's sufficient for our low poly. So if we look at this carefully in terms of unwrap, you could almost treat it like a cylinder again, arguably top and the bottom and the sides, but there would be some level of distortion over here if we tried to stitch everything together. So my feeling is with that particular one, in order to unwrap that, I would adopt a slightly different approach. So just turn off ignore back facing. Again, just make sure you select everything, give it one simple planar map, and then we can go in there and just deselect the areas we know need to be detached. So you could strongly argue that that top one there, I'll just turn on my angle snap again, put it on to 2, that one there, and the bottom one there, break those off, push them to the side. We can peel them now if we want, or peel them later. Just move them over there. And then looking at this, it would suggest to me that if we kept all this stitched together, it's going to cause potentially some distortion in the UV. So it might be better if we were to select that side and the bottom side over here and detach those and move them over. You would have to use the UV checker texture. I don't need to in this instance because I know what I'm doing. You need to do it so you can see where there's errors. If I press peel now, I know now there's distortion on that. We would need to put a split in there to resolve some of this. So splitting these two edges, break, peeling them again, that there is going to be absolutely perfect in terms of the textile race. And then likewise, we do have the sides of our box over here, one split on the side, a quick peel, and that's good to go as well. So we do need to rescale all of this, rescale, pack UVs, and then naturally you don't want rotations such as this. So the easiest way to rotate this is going to be just select one of the edges and click on align to edge. If it doesn't do it, sometimes it doesn't do it, it should do it. We can try thinking, okay, well something isn't quite working out. Let's see what happens if we were to collapse the stack and reset the X form. So remember how I said sometimes whenever you unwrap, if it does something strange, it doesn't make sense, then reset the X form, go back into the modifier and attempt to do it again, which is exactly what we're doing now. So turn this ignore back facing off again, going to select that bottom edge, align to edge, and it still hasn't worked. It should have worked, quite why it hasn't, that's a max bug, not to worry, we'll just have to do it manually. So we've still got our angle snap on, turn that off with A, and then just move it, rotate it like so. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but as long as it's good enough, that's sufficient enough. So just check to make sure nothing is averted, nothing is overlapped. I think that should be okay. Unhide everything again. So we've got our low poly, we've got our high poly, and the process of baking is exactly the same as I have showed in the past, so you should all know how to do that now. So if we think of this logically, rather than me trying to do every single shape, give this a go. Clearly you can see how this is. It's just a cube ultimately, regardless of these other areas. If we were to replicate that at a very, very basic level, then all we would do, just so you know how to do it, I'm just going to go into left viewport just to get an indication of what the actual shape is. And we could use the line tool. This is a great way of doing things. So we can use the line tool and press it once. I'm just going to go on a wireframe. Press shift will lock it. In this instance, because I'm using an existing shape, I've got something to work with. You could just do this with a cube. Press shift again to keep it straight. Move it along to there. Press shift. Move to here. Press shift. And ultimately attach it to that section over there. This is slightly off in comparison to that. You probably should grab that verse and just align it to that. But not a problem. You can do that. So you want to keep things nice and quadded, because ultimately just make life a bit easier. If you didn't, you could just adopt the inset process like we did on here. So let's try, well, we'll just quickly do it, I suppose. So over here, we'll use some slightly different techniques. We want to, in an ideal world, keep it nice and quadded because it would make life a lot easier. So let's essentially turn this simple shape into quads. So it would suggest to me that If I was to draw an edge from here to here, that would be a quad. If I drew an edge from there to there, that would be a quad and a quad, and you'd have a quad and a quad. So we'll give that a go. So I've got my cut tool on. I'm going to turn on my snaps, make sure I'm snapping to vertices. Let's hide everything else and then just cut those edges in. So that there, that one there, and that one there. So clearly you can see quad, 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 quad. And now it's going to be easily usable. We should be able to put swift loops on there relatively straightforward, and it should work quite well. What I will do is I'm just going to duplicate this just in case we need to use it again. Just move that over to the side. So really you do want to snap these together, so press yes and snap that one to there. That one should snap fine with there, to be fair, so I'll snap that one to there originally and then snap that one to there as well. That should be okay. Likewise, that should snap to that one, and this one should snap to that one. We know this one's slightly off, you can see there, so I'm just going to snap that one to there. That'll do for the time being. So let's just add some depth to this. We could use the shell modifier, and I'm just going to adjust the outer amount. We'll assume that's okay, and collapse 2 on there. So this is going to be the start of our high poly as well. So we might as well consider adding the edge loops in now. So let's call this again, name it appropriately. I've just put that down because I can't think of an appropriate name, but you can come up with something. So it's in editable mesh, we do not want that, we want it to be in editable poly. And then go into edge mode and again add the edge loops via the swift loop option. So swift loop, so what one there, again the rule of threes applies, and then we can always add these supporting edge loops in between as the case may be. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. We want this to have a soft edge here, but still hard in the sense that you want it to be tight rather than be a big curve. So we'll put those edges in there. Because we've kept it quadded, you can see the edge flows coming across to here. And then one there, one there. And that should be it. Then we're missing one over here, so we just need to add that in there as well. Now, quick final check. 3, we're missing one there, you can see. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. Yeah, that looks okay there. We'll know straight away once we hit Turbo Smooth whether things are right or they're wrong. A quick test. Just jack those values up. Yes, that's fine. Yep, you can clearly see it's working. So we know we've got all the edge loops in place. Really, we should go back in there and add some additional supporting loops so it's not so dependent on a high Turbo Smooth value. So again, just using the connect might be the best option. So I won't go nuts this time. 2 in there, click on the plus, click 1, press shift. Probably get away with adding 3 there. What I'm trying to do is trying to keep these relatively the same size. Click on the plus, click on that one. Try and keep these square. That's got 4 in there, that will work well. I've accidentally pressed it twice, so just undo a step. And that should be, undo 2 steps. There we are. Oh, here we are. This is another max bug. Click on the plus icon. You can see what's happened there. It thinks I'm trying to do it twice. So when it does that, just cancel it. And then just apply the same process again. So select the edges, click on the connect, click on the plus once. That will work there. Then finally, well, within reason because I think we're missing some other ones. Click on the plus. And then this should be it finally. Again, trying to keep things relatively square, that will do. So that's now going to be perfect for our Turbo Smooth. For Turbo Smooth, switch that on, put the value down to something on those lines. Perfect. Mesh is nice and clean. Easily we can bake now from a high to low. What we have done, we haven't set up our loops properly on this. That can often happen, as I've already demonstrated. Perfectly fine. All we'll do is we'll assume this is our high. We're going to make our copy again. Call this the low, obviously. I'm assuming that was a copy. Just make sure, yeah, that's okay. Hide everything else. Because, well, to be fair, paranoia, I suppose, I didn't quite check. So what I should do is just undo a few steps. Well, but just unhide everything. Just want to check to make sure that I did use copy and not instance. So we've just got the one copy there, hide poly, isolate everything, Control V, copy, which is correct, LP. What I didn't want to do was the same mistake as previously and have to go back in there and manually make that fix. So you can see the edges are bunched up here, perfectly fine because this is flat. If it was the case that this was an organic curve, then naturally at this point over here the curvature would be destroyed and would be quite angular, so we'd have to redistribute the edges on there. So we've got our Turbo Smooth, turn that off, collapse 2 on there, and then simply, because we made that crucial error, remember, of not putting it on a modifier, it now means we'd have to go in there and manually do this. So it's not necessarily the end of the world, but you can see the benefit of producing the modifier. Oops-a-daisy. You can see the benefit of producing the modifier and then being able to switch things on and off, saving you the hassle of doing exactly what we're doing now. So that there is how to do the hand section. That is a cylinder. We know how to do that because we know how to do that. Once you've understood how to produce this shape, then clearly you can produce that shape. Then it is quite literally simply a matter of duplicating the cylinders you have. Why you've got a high for that, you've got a low for that. Select the two of them, move them over here, scale them accordingly, and save yourself a bit of work. That shape there is the same as that. You know how to make your high, you've made your low, select both of them, move them into place, rotate them around as the case may be, and voila, you've now got that bit there without the, with a minimum of work really. That's just a cylinder with an inset. You should know how to do that. So you're quite literally going to look at that shape and say, well, how am I going to recreate that? And clearly you can see that it's straightforward. I don't think any of you should struggle doing that. So that is in essence how to do the arm and the hand. What remains now is the attachment, or the shoulder attachment, which I can't see on this because I've hidden everything else. So that is finally the very last thing we'll take a quick look at, and then that should be sufficient enough for this particular section.